Hi again, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on reaching your social equity objectives with tech. Before we get started today, I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping items. First is going to be the presentation is recorded and we will be sending it out within the next 48 hours, so no need to do any scrambling notes. You'll be able to revert back to the presentation if you wish. Second, we'll have a Q&A portion at the very end of the presentation. You'll notice on the control panel that there is a question section. So if you want to write in your questions before the end, please feel free and we'll get to them at the Q&A portion. You'll also see that there is a raised hand function in the control panel. So if you wish, at the end of the webinar during the Q&A, if you want to raise your hand, I will gladly unmute you, give you some powers, and you'll be able to share your thoughts and comments with us and questions if you wish. So as I'm sure you see, we're going to start with introductions. You probably noticed I'm joined here by 3 other panelists. So we're just going to do a quick introduction. I will break the ice and start off. So my name is Alysson. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at Amelia, SmartRec. I've been at the company for just about 5 years now and really have gotten to see it grow and expand and learn a lot from Parks and Recreation. And at our simplest form, SmartRec, we're a registration platform, but really in reality, we're much more than that. Not only do we strive to make it easy for participants to register for an activity, just as easy as it is to buy a book on Amazon, but we also provide you, an agency, with all the tools to help you strengthen your ties to your community. I'm going to highlight 2 specific tools today. They're going to be cost recovery and community segments. Cost recovery, I'm not going to lie, I hold kind of near and dear to my heart and my everyday job. We partnered with Jamie Sabak from 110% about 2 years ago, and she's been an industry expert in helping us build a cost recovery tool. And over the last year since the start of COVID, we've worked with 30 or so agencies in cost recovery projects. So it's really kind of been, it's allowed me personally to work with a lot of different agencies and kind of eye-opening in how much I've been able to learn. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to James and Jonathan so they can introduce themselves.
Great, thanks Alysson, and thank you everybody for the time today to join us in our webinar. Really excited about today's presentation. Hopefully you'll gain some insight on a lot of different concepts on social equity and as well as GIS, which we'll be concentrating on. My name is James Kelt. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Software with Geographic Technologies Group. I've been with the company for 19 years now, and really, like I said, really excited about introducing the group to a Parks and Recreation initiative that we have developed over the last 6 or 7 years called GreenCityGIS. Now, we serve GIS and geospatial solutions to municipalities throughout North America. So we're in Canada, we're in the United States as well. And over the years, we really wanted to focus a lot of our effort on how GIS and geospatial tools can engage with the Parks and Recreation Department at all different levels. And for today's webinar, we're really going to specifically focus on social equity and how GIS can accomplish and overcome some challenges that we all face within the organization. You'll see a lot of different tools as we talk a little bit more about GIS. We'll show some software. And also, we're looking to engage with Amelia and the rest of our colleagues to provide additional webinars in the future for more GIS tools, how they apply to Parks and Recreation. You're gonna hear us talk a little bit about a company, a business partner of ours, Esri, ESRI. ESRI is the industry standard GIS component, a global company that serves GIS to all different types of users. So we're an Esri business partner, and some of the tools you'll see are specific to that environment. So if you're a GIS person or you've used GIS before, you've probably heard of Esri. And really the goal with our concept is, as you see in the bullet lists on this slide, really to make our Parks and Recreation as smart as possible, as effective as possible, to ask and answer questions, to overcome challenges, to our users, our community that we focus on. So it's a real new Parks and Recreation Geospatial initiative, and I think you'll gain a lot of insight as we get a little bit further into today's webinar. With me today, I have Jonathan Welker. Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself before we pass it over to Seve?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, James. So I'm Jonathan Welker. I'll be serving as James's right-hand man today. I'm a Senior Enterprise Solutions Analyst with Geographic Technologies Group, and I deploy and configure many of the GIS solutions associated with our GreenCityGIS business line. So today I'll just be speaking to a couple of the software demonstrations, and I appreciate you guys joining us.
Great. Thanks. Seve?
Okay. Thank you, James. Once again, my name is Seve Ghose. I'm currently the director in Thornton Parks and Recreation and Community Programs. We're a city in the Denver metro area. This is my third year in Thornton, and we've accomplished quite a bit in the 3 years, and we'll talk about cost recovery in a little bit. But I've been in public service for 30 years in 5 states. I would like to highlight a couple of those places. Portland, Oregon, where Parks and Recreation ranks #1 in the city hierarchy, which is a great honor to have as a department head and so on. So it was a fun place. And Louisville, Kentucky, which is the #1 city with the most Olmsted designed parks. If you're a parks fanatic, you know Frederick Law Olmsted. He designed quite a few parks, mainly on the East Coast and some of the central parts of the US. But in Louisville, we're privy to having 17 parks that were designed by Olmsted as the highest number in the US. So overall, my career has been mainly about community building. As a public servant, that's what we try to do in Parks and Recreation. And obviously, we're going to talk about cost recovery process, strategic planning, but all of those things can only be accomplished if you have full inclusion as your framework. So a couple of or 3 of the things I would like to highlight on the bottom of the slide that you see there that I've practiced in my career is having a vision and the leadership and the political will. So the vision is about including all layers of the staff. So the vision does not percolate into day-to-day work if everyone does not buy into it. So you have to have that transparency and that level of buy-in from all layers of the organization that you represent. And then leadership is all about bold leadership, taking the chances. When you have the opportunity to do something good for the community, is moving forward with it. And not saying that you don't bring other people along, but the idea is that you have to present yourself as the leader that's pushing this idea or the framework forward. And then the last one is the political will. We'll talk about that a little bit later too, because the time and the framework that we are dealing with currently in the social strata of both North and South America, maybe even the world, is social equity, and it has come to the forefront. And people are willing to listen. When I say people, politicians are willing to listen and sit down and at least assess some of the situation that's happening around the world. So I would suggest taking advantage of that. And the political will is usually the hardest one because you have to kind of sell your department, Parks and Recreation, to the electeds so that they represent also the same ideas that you are representing on a day-to-day basis. But at this time, we have the upper hand in the sense that we are a big player in the social equity piece, so we should take advantage of that. So with that, I would ask Alysson to forward us to the next slide, please. And I wanted to continue speaking to a couple of the items. So knowing your community. So in the context of on a day-to-day basis, how do you decipher what program needs are out there in the community? Data is very important. So the first piece is knowing your community. So knowing the backgrounds, socioeconomic structure, the cultural demographics, and also collecting that data. So once you have collected that data, you have to have the ability, or a staff member with that ability on your staff team that analyzes that data and produces some path to take as you move forward in implementing some of the ideas that you have just learned about. And the goal of the data collection is to find where the gaps are. So the gaps are what you need to fill, because a community moves on with programming and facilities and amenities that we offer on a daily basis. But filling the gaps is where you become more inclusive. Again, going back to the idea I shared earlier about being fully inclusive. So to that point, I think you have to do this genuinely. Many communities, hold community meetings and so on, and I hope people come. But the idea is to take the meeting to the places, especially where the underrepresented populations live, work, play, or even congregate. And that's how you get more of that buy-in from the community. And also having the ability to listen, and maybe even potentially learning a second language so that you are able to break the ice with the group that you're trying to incorporate into your day-to-day programming. And then obviously learning the cultural nuances of some of these groups. I think that's very important. You cannot just go there and say, we're looking to do this. You have to have that level of buy-in from them too. And then you become the champion of breaking down the red tape, especially I'm speaking from the municipal side of government, saying that I become the torchbearer for breaking down the red tape. So they, when I say they, also meaning the underrepresented communities also feel included in the day-to-day processes. And then obviously the last piece is doing the surveys and the needs assessment on a regular basis. It's not just a one-off, doing it once every 3 to 5 years, but doing it every year, maybe a couple of times a year, and doing it in an inclusive way so that you do it in different languages, different media, and doing it and also at different sites where people are able to get to those sites to participate in the surveys. And that again allows us to collect the data that allows us to make future decisions on how best to move forward with programming and so on.
So Seve sets the stage extremely well. So in here, we're looking at data, gaps, and needs assessment. So today in our webinar, we're going to look over the following objectives. We're going to start and how to identify, we're going to do a little tech level set. So what are the technical terms that we're going to cover today? We're going to define social equity and what that looks like for Park and Rec agency. And then we're going to talk about those tech tools to help exactly do that. What are the data, the gaps, and the needs assessment? How can they help within those three elements? And then we're going to wrap this all up by giving you some actionable into items to take away. So we want you to be able to leave today's webinar and be able to go ahead and implement some of these tech processes in order to help you achieve that social equity goals. So in terms of our terminology for the day, the three things we're going to cover are 1, GIS, so Geographic Information System, cost recovery, and community segments. We're going to kick it off with cost recovery. I'm going to do just a brief introduction. As mentioned in my intro, we do have a cost recovery module included in our software. And what the cost recovery module does is it helps with the cost of service analysis. So it will help with crunching the numbers behind the revenue collected between the different services and the costs associated to all of those services. And then it gives you some insights. So we'll give you some ideas of how you're performing as an agency and where you might need to place more time and energy in order to help reach those cost recovery goals. I also mentioned in the beginning that we've worked with 30 agencies so far this year, and one of the agencies we've worked with is Seve from Thornton. So I'm going to let him speak a little bit more about not just cost recovery again as a tool, but as a philosophy and as a strategy, and how he's implemented and how it's changed his agency.
Well, thank you, Alysson. So as you heard from Alysson, our Parks and Recreation Department engaged Amelia in July of last year, 2020, in the height of the pandemic, but we got through this exercise. The idea was to see where we fit in, where we're at, and how we can make certain progress in the fee structure of our programs. We felt many of our programs had basically been run at a status quo with no real assessing and evaluation process in place. So the one place we started with was cost recovery through Amelia. What it allowed us to see was to see where the gaps are. And you're going to hear this phrase quite a bit about where the gaps are, and also to see where the potential lies. So the idea was to, again, assess the information that we gather from, again, involving all layers of staff in the organization in the team that worked with Amelia. We had about actually 18 staff members, even in our small department, that participated in the process. And the idea was to see where we can recoup the greatest percentage of the cost. So some programs obviously recoup a high percentage based on the quality of the program or the level of participation in that program. But how to look at it in such a way that that program also helps subsidize the programs that do struggle, especially in challenged neighborhoods where people have inability to pay for those same programs. So over the course of the 6 months, we came to a conclusion also working with involving our 3 boards. We have 3 advisory boards and commissions that work with our department. They were also heavily involved. All stakeholders in the community were involved. We even had our finance department staff involved, so they got to have a level of buy-in from the inside. And also our budgeting staff were also involved in the whole process for the 6 months. And actually, I as the head of the organization, pulled myself away so people were free to talk and share the ideas, and again, made it very inclusive from the very beginning. The biggest thing with cost recovery is that the first thing you have to do, and we did that internally, is that the status quo was not acceptable. So we wanted to change the status quo. And so the idea was to bring people together, share the ideas, and assess of what we're doing, and crunching the numbers into the system. And then what we came up with was a 5-year plan. So the cost recovery is not a one-shot deal where you just turn the key after you've done your assessment and hope things change. So it is a process. It takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years. In our case, we decided to have a 1-year plan and also a 5-year plan. So the 1-year plan, the way it works is that to take care of the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So things we can fix right away and make adjustments to the fee structure, cost structure. We were able to do that, and we're doing it in 2021 because we implemented the program fully in mid-January of 2021. And then as part of the 5-year program, there are certain aspects where we have had programs in our community where we've basically allowed the program to take place with no fee recovery or cost recovery, and so not making any money. But as the community has changed, we're now the 6th largest city in Colorado. As the demographic changes, people seek different avenues, to participate. So how do we take advantage of that? So what we're doing is that basically we're asking the question, and you hear this question later on too, is it for the individual good or is it for the community good? So the higher price programs are usually typically good for the individual. So we're charging the higher fee that helps subsidize the fees for programs where we cannot charge a higher fee. So maybe a drop-in basketball program, especially if the basketball program is held in a community center that's in an underrepresented part of the community. The expectation is that it will be more than likely free or a very low cost. So you balance what works for you in your system. And in our case, we've been very happy with the work we did with Amelia, and we're fully implementing the cost recovery plan that we adopted. And with that, I'll pass it on to James to talk about the GIS.
Thanks, Seve. Yeah, so GIS, just want to give a quick high-level overview of what GIS is. I often get asked from friends and family, what is it exactly you do for a living? And I try to explain it as digital mapping, and that's a good start. And the first response I typically get when I explain that is, oh, you do that GPS stuff. And that's part of it, right? So GPS data and collection of data is a part of a GIS, geographic information system, but it's really more than that. Essentially, if you can imagine the world that you live in, right, we can model that in software to ask and answer questions. We can run analysis. We can look at data and trends. We can see this information in a digital world in real time in some cases, to be able to ask those questions, make efficient and effective decision-making processes. We can look at models of information. We can analyze. A lot of different concepts are built within a GIS system. So it's really software, it's data layers. We'll talk about data layers here in a second. But on this next slide, what you'll see is it's really incorporating information from multiple sources. So you use a word processor, you use email, that type of thing. And GIS is very similar to that type of technology. Basically, what we're able to do here is bring forth data from multiple sources. A lot of times that might be data from your park network, so your facilities, the park amenities, the trails, the trees, all those different features that you have in a GIS layer. But we can also complement it with database information. So there's a wealth of information coming out of your recreation management software that we can bring into the map, so you can see where your recreation users are and what are they signing up for and what programs are working and what are the demographics of those individuals. So once we get this information, we can bring a lot of information in. We can do GPS data, so GPS enabled devices, we can bring that into the model. We can bring demographic information into the model. We can see population trends. We can also bring in social media. So bringing in information, say, from a Twitter feed into a GIS allows us to visualize what people are talking about at any given point in time. So once we have access to this data, it's really the window into our environment. So we can analyze and evaluate accordingly based on the programs and the services that we're looking to provide. So finally, what ends up happening is you get a layering system, right? You're going to see data from multiple sources incorporated into a software package that allows us to, like I said, ask and answer these questions. So really the sky's the limit on how much of this information we want access to or need access to. And it really helps us accomplish the goals for the group. And traditionally, GIS really, over the years, in my experience, it only sit in the hands of a few. So highly trained GIS individuals, GIS professionals, that's their career. But in the last half decade or more, what we're able to do now is really disseminate the tools and technology to all different types of users. That might be staff within your department, whether it be a recreation department, parks amenities department, and those types of users, but also the residents and citizens that you serve. There's a lot of online resources, GIS resources, that allow us to promote what you're doing as a group to the residents that you serve. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in another slide. But keep that in mind, GIS is a tool that you have access to in most cases. A lot of the municipalities that we serve have a GIS group in-house. And so it's a matter of packaging the right data that makes sense for you as an organization to accomplish the goals and tasks that are set forth.
And then for community segments, and you can actually refer back and think about the previous slide that James spoke about the different layers of a GIS. But for us, community segment, it combines a portion of the two top layers that James was speaking about. So citizens engaging in your services and where they reside. So community segments at a core and fundamentally within our platform, within a registration software, allows you to create specific segmentations of your community, which can be similar to resident and non-resident pricing, but it also can include segmenting specific neighborhoods within your community. It can be segmenting participant based on past services that they registered to. It could be segmenting your community based on specific demographic identifiers, maybe age, and then allowing those specific segmentations that you've created certain benefits that could apply to, or that you want to apply to those specific segments. And the benefits could be early registration, discounts to specific services, to access to different scholarship programs that you might be running, and more than that. So community segment kind of combines those first two layers of that James was speaking of, and allowing for action based on that. So we're going to move into social equity, and social equity is important no matter what industry you're working in, and honestly, just on an individual level, it's something that everyone should be super mindful of. But as park and recreation professionals, it's even more crucial. I'm going to let Seve speak to his experience dealing with social equity as a director and some of the challenges he's faced and how it relates to the park and rec industry.
Well, thank you, Alysson. So I'm sure most of you have seen this pictorial in the past, which talks to equality and equity. And so I would like to read the definition that NRPA, National Recreation Park Association, which is our parent organization that most of us belong to, has shared over the last few years. So I would like to read it because it is important. So ensuring all people have fair and just access to the benefits of high quality parks and green spaces, recreational facilities, youth sports, and programs that create healthy, resilient, and economically vibrant communities. That cannot be further from the truth. But in reality, what happens in most communities, and I'm sure many of you will agree, we get stuck on equality. So I think that the communication piece is the most important piece here. We feel like, you know, if a certain part of a community builds a $30 million rec center, the other community should also build a rec center that's worth $30 million, and then somehow you have equity in the system. And that cannot be further from the truth. So the idea behind equality versus equity is to differentiate equity as something where equality can be defined as, say, being invited to a dance, but equity is actually being asked to dance. If you could feel that analogy in your head and kind of assimilate, you'll understand the nuances there to that difference. And one point to make clear is that you cannot build yourself out of or having equity in the system. What you're basically doing is creating equality. So the differentiation has to be important in many communities because they spend a lot of time on equality but not addressing equity. And equity has to come from within, and it is a cultural shift. It is a change in the way we do business. It is a way in which we implement policies and procedures, being inclusive of people of all backgrounds in the development of those policies and procedures and before even implementation. So I just wanted to share some of those things. And then what results from equity is actually creative programming, because programming creates greater equity. And then the strategic allocation of those resources, which are very sparse in most municipal budgets, but how you allocate them in the marginalized populations, underrepresented populations, that brings about equity. And that has to be the defining goal of how you accomplish equity. And we're trying a lot of those things in Thornton. To speak to the example of Thornton, is to kind of get a better level of equity through programming. And that's one major tool that's available in our toolbox that we can use on a daily basis. And with that, I think Alysson is going to ask a poll question here.
Yeah, so we wanted to gauge a little bit from the audience, from you guys. Does social equity keep you up at night? Is this something that's at the front of your mind in terms of your agency? So I'll launch the poll. You guys will see it come up on your screen, and you'll be able to answer it. It is launched, so you should be able to see it. And I'll give maybe about a minute for people to answer, probably a little bit less than that. So I already have a couple answers coming in. So far, seemingly pretty close to split. A little bit more on the yes, but I do have some no's. I'll give it a couple more seconds. And I'm not seeing it shift too much now, so I will close it. In terms of response, we have 48% saying yes and 52% saying no. I'll share those responses with everybody here. And yes. So surprising in terms of responses,
Yeah.
at least on my mind. But we'll see what Seve thinks about keeping you up at night, what keeps him up at night.
Yeah, no, so absolutely. Thank you, Alysson. Yeah, I'm a little surprised with the numbers too, but just to kind of share, as we go through this slide here, COVID has been a big distractor in 2020 and continues to be even in 2021. And it has been tough on everyone. And actually it has kind of shown more of the gaps in that and more of the inequities in the system. So how do we bring about social equity even in these tough times or troubling times? And it's about how you, again, go back to the programming piece, how you engage the community in a genuine level and so on. So before you go out into the community, you also have to engage the staff, because we get caught up in our day-to-day work. We think everything is going well, but how do you get them to serve the community equitably? So it's a mindset change, it's an internal cultural shift change. And that again comes from the top down, but also from the bottom up, because if most of the great ideas come from the frontline staff. And how do you engage the frontline staff in implementing some of those ideas that could potentially work in bringing about greater equity in the system? The other piece I wanted to talk about was the prioritizing the underserved parts of the community. So this has to be deliberate and intentional. So you have to focus your strategies and your resources into those underserved areas, because that's where the greatest gap is. And then obviously you have to do it in a financially feasible way. As you learned about the cost recovery model, we want to stick to the model because you don't want to stray from that model as best you can. And the idea is to, again, be cognizant of the fact that you have a set budget that you work with, but you also have other opportunities potentially to garner additional funds through grants and other ways. And we'll talk about those in a little bit later too. And with that, obviously, the biggest thing is using tech. And this is where James and his group is an example of what comes in. And they'll talk about more about how to bring that about through, bring about social equity through their software.
Yes, exactly. That brings us to our third part in our webinar here. So, I mean, Seve gave us some really insightful examples as to where challenges could be with regarding to social equity, and I'm sure some of you it speaks to you today. And I wish I could say that tech could solve all social equity challenges, but obviously that's not going to be the case. But we do want to share a couple of ways that you can leverage technology to help you reach some of those social equity goals. And we'll start by putting the pieces of the puzzle together. So we overviewed GIS, cost recovery, community segments. We're going to talk about all of those a little bit individually and exactly how you can leverage them for social equity, and then how they can be leveraged together in a centralized approach to be even more powerful.
Great, thanks, Alysson. So in the GreenCityGIS application suite, it really is composed of multiple tool sets. So we try to put as many tools in the toolbox as possible to accomplish the goals and tasks. We're going to look at a smart map viewer as well as a dashboard tool to show you how to analyze and ask these types of questions here in a minute. But those are internal applications. Those are tools that are going to be used for your staff. But we also want to engage with residents. The park locator tool and story map tools allows us to really engage with residents. I'm new to the area. I'd like to identify where a particular park feature or amenity might be located. Maybe reserve a gazebo for a birthday party that I'd like to have, that kind of thing. These tools allow us to engage with the residents to do so, as well as a data collection, right? So as you build out your parks, or if you're adding new facilities and amenities, or creating new parks, if you're still growing as an organization, the data collector component is important to make sure that the information is as current as possible. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jonathan once more. He's going to walk us through a handful of different scenarios and applications. Jonathan?
Yes, excellent. Thanks, James. So the first application we're going to take a look at is going to be the viewer, which essentially is kind of like a Google Maps intuitive map with your data loaded. So with our park system and assets mapped and geo-enabled, we can start to analyze the coverage of our park system for gaps. So to start, we could just generate a 1 mile buffer around our parks, and at this range, we can see we're looking pretty good on our coverage. And so next, maybe we'll trim it down into a 1/2 mile buffer. Again, there's a few little gaps towards the edge of our city boundary that we can see, but still pretty good coverage. So finally, let's do a 1/4 mile. And here we can see there are some actual areas in our park system that are not covered in that kind of 5 to 10 minute walking distance. So we can then overlay the parcels, go ahead and zoom into a specific area. Maybe we want to look for opportunities for acquisition or development, or maybe we could even want to generate mailing labels to see what residents are interested in that area. We can also include demographic and socioeconomic characteristics on a layer level into this environment. So we can turn on Esri's tapestry segmentation, for instance, and look at some of the demographics and the metrics that they have to offer, including things like race and ethnicity. And then they also have a detailed report for every single one of these segmentations. So clicking on this link, we can give the PDF just a second to load. And then we'll get a very detailed understanding of exactly what this particular neighborhood has to offer, from the demographics, the socioeconomic traits, income and net worth, race and ethnicity, and many, many other criteria available through this environment. And so that was just scratching the surface on the viewer. And I believe next we will go ahead and hop into our dashboard, which is a configurable high-level overview where we can look at various metrics. And really start to analyze, again, from a high level, how our recreation users are doing and how we're reaching our participants. So a configured ArcGIS dashboard really provides that high level overview of our recreation users, including where they're located, what activities they're signing up for. It's also interactive and dynamic. So I've clicked on this youth activity type in my pie chart, and we can see all of our metrics and our map change corresponding with that. And now additionally, we could use the buttons at the top. Maybe we're interested in just our male registrations, our female registrations, and clearing that out. We could also look at age group ranges. So an age between maybe 13 and 18 if we're interested in looking at what our teens are signing up for and what activities are most popular among those age groups. Finally here, once I clear out those age groups, we can also check city representations from surrounding cities. So maybe there are activities that visitors are coming into our city and signing up for. What are those? We can see we have 41 coming from Eden Prairie, and we can see the top activities for that particular area. So again, helping us identify gaps and opportunities even outside of our own city boundaries. And the final application we'll take a look at kind of takes the high-level overview and metrics a bit further. And you can engage even more with our recreation data. And this environment really encourages you to fully explore both the tabular and geographic data components. It makes on-the-fly analysis really intuitive. For instance, I could select my elderly age groups from my histogram here at the bottom if we want to investigate metrics related to our 60+ participants specifically. And with all these widgets currently linked, everything is going to shift and change accordingly, showing me or highlighting the activities they're signing up for, where they're coming from. And then I could even select this subset of my 60+ participants and then find a blank space on my workbook and create a new analytical chart or graph to investigate just that subset further, or even create a table as we see me doing here. Then we could adjust, the branding, the theme, if we wanted to share this with some colleagues, again, kind of creating that reporting workbook, or we could even take this further and share this with the public if we wanted to go to that level. And finally, again, we could look at the city representation here to see, maybe we're interested in what are our 3 highest cities outside of our own, and what are they coming into our city to sign up for. So we can see the heat map adjusting our age distribution. So again, this is all about finding out what activities of ours in nearby cities and residents from those cities are interested in, what areas we are succeeding in, but also identifying potential gaps that we could address as well. Seve, turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it. So talking about cost recovery in further detail. So in our exercise, and I think I've shared a little bit of this earlier on, what we tried to do in our exercise, and I think every agency should do this, is as you outline every service you offer. So that includes every facility that's rentable, every program that's available, and every amenity that's also rentable and used on a regular basis. So the idea is that anything that has a cost attached to it, or you're bringing in revenue from the use of that amenity or that facility, should be on that cost recovery study or the modeling exercise. So the next phase of this is outlining the direct and indirect costs. So typically in Parks and Recreation, we're very good at including all the direct costs. The indirect costs play a major role in the cost recovery modeling. So if you're having, for example, a Zumba class, the direct cost is typically the staff costs and the supplies for that class, in a rec center. But the indirect costs also play a major role because you're using a room for an hour and a half of that class. So you have to pay the utilities, there's wear and tear on the building. There might be a depreciation schedule that your city uses that allows for allocating a certain percentage of the cost of running the building to that cost. So those are those indirect costs that also play a major role. So be aware that you want to include both indirect and direct costs in this exercise. And then the other piece is the analysis. So making sure that you're inclusive, again, of all stakeholders, from the inside to the outside, and people that are also making decisions on your behalf. So whether it's city council, the advisory boards, the commissions, and then all layers of staff in the organization. So you have to involve and be inclusive of all the groups. And then what happens typically is that cost recovery, it needs to be thoughtful. It cannot be just because the modeling says we can make more money by raising the fee of a particular program in a particular neighborhood or rec center. That, again, you cannot just turn the switch and expect people to keep coming to that program that they were coming for many years by just doubling the fee and so on. So it has to be deliberate, intentional, thoughtful, and include all stakeholders and all decision makers in that process, and obviously definitely the community members in that process to create that better understanding of continuing that program. And if I could go to the next slide, Alysson. Okay, The other piece to talk about here is keeping that solid foundation, as I mentioned. So again, going back to that equity example of knowing who cannot see over the fence. And that's a big deal, because that's who you're concentrating the whole cost recovery model to bring equality to, or bring equity to the system, and not just equality, you know. So identifying who is engaged and why they're not engaged. And that takes place by collecting, doing surveys and deciphering where the gaps are. And again, being intentional and deliberate about it. So as you do your needs assessment, I think it's important to do them in various languages, using various media forms, and again, going out to those areas that actually are left behind, and so they can now participate in a survey where we might present it in the language that they speak or the ideas that they understand. And then obviously the goal is to find solutions and engage everyone in the process. So creating equity through strategic and dynamic pricing. If I could use an example of that, on a daily basis, you might have a golf course in your system. So say between 2 and 5, I'm just using this example, on a Wednesday, you might have the fewest rounds played at your golf course for whatever reason, but the trend is there. The trending shows that the golf course is not being heavily used between 2 and 5 on a Wednesday. That from the data that you collect or that you see on your sales data, you should be able to price your rounds between 2 and 5 on a Wednesday to a much lower price. So maybe that might change the use of the golf course, and more people would come during that time. And also on the flip side, on the weekends when most people wish to play between say 7 and noon on a Saturday and a Sunday, you could use a higher pricing module, so to speak, where you open up the scheduling process for the tee times, and people pay a higher price if they book 2 weeks out instead of your typical 1 week booking time for a tee time at the golf course. So again, there are many ways to play with the cost recovery model, but it is a process, again, that takes time, and you should be patient enough to implement and all the goals of the program or the modeling exercise fully. And with that, I think Alysson is going to do another quick poll here.
Yeah, we're going to launch one other poll. We want to again hear from you guys. This question is, should we prioritize programs with the broadest community benefit, or should we prioritize programs that have the highest cost recovery? So I will launch that poll right now, and you guys should see it up on your screen. And I will give you guys again a couple seconds to answer. We're at 67% voted, so I'll give it just a couple more seconds, maybe 10, 15 more seconds. Let people get their last votes in, and then share the results with you guys. All right. And I'm going to share it. So 15% said those with the highest cost recovery. 85% said those with the broadest community benefit. I will hide that and let Seve share his feedbacks on that.
No, absolutely. So real quick, actually, I'm not surprised with this result compared to the first one. So this one into the modeling exercise a lot better. And typically that's the result you'd get on a typical survey anywhere in any community in North America. With that, we'll go to the next slide, Alysson.
All right, thanks. So Jonathan, James, and Seve shared some really great information about how to leverage GIS and cost recovery to gain insights into your community and how they're being served. So referring back to, again, Seve and his contact slide in the very beginning, talking about data and gaps. So identifying and analyzing data, as well as taking that data and being able to identify then the gaps. So both GIS and cost recovery help you make sense of the data you have available and show you where your efforts need to be placed. So again, identifying, using the data, identifying the gaps. Community segment allows you to take action on those insights. So once and if you've determined that there is an underserved segment of your community that is facing barriers to participating in your services, and the barriers could be, again, affordability, physical access, limited access to technology, and a ton more. Well, with community segments, you'll be able to target that pocket of the community and offer specific benefits that you think and that you're based on your knowledge will help them participate to the services you're looking for. So the specific benefits, again, could be early registration, exclusive active access to certain services that you're providing, again, access to specific scholarship programs, and so on. So it ties back to that notion that Seve shared with us earlier, that just because your activities are available to everyone doesn't mean everyone should have equal access. So again, to that like who can see over the fence notion. And community segment goes really a step further than that. So it takes it a step further in the sense that you want your actions to be successful. It's not because you implement action that and you've identified an underserved portion of your community, let's say, and given them access to a discount, that everything is taken care of. Again, referring back to that context slide where there needs to be a needs assessment, where you need to assess whether the actions that you're taking, if it's being fruitful or not. So on the screen here, what you see are two different heat maps. They represent two different community segments. So the one at the top is showing more orange and yellow. It's giving us an idea that the engagement for that community segment is greater. If we're looking at the lower map, it's showing just a few sparse green circles, and it's showing that that engagement is really low. So then from that, we can be able to assess whether the approach that we're taking to target that underserved portion of the community is effective or not. So being able to report on the actions you take will offer the possibility to shift approaches. So if you see something's not working, you can make an assessment and shift maybe the type of benefit that you're offering that specific segment. And then to tie it back all together, we have that last piece of the puzzle. And I'm sure you've noticed through all of us speaking that there has been some overlap in the three technologies. I've mentioned today how community segment is a module and a feature within our registration software, but it uses information from Esri and from Google in order to map out and identify where the participants actually resides. And James talked about how within the GIS system, you can pull information from your registration software and map out different participation. And for me, what's really important here is when you're choosing a software, you want to choose something that's modern in terms of technology. And what that means is that you want one software system that can share relevant information with another software system. For you, what that means is it creates a more systemized approach to your processes. It allows an agency to make more relevant and informed decisions because you're going to have all the right data at the right place and be able to see and have the right people within your agency as well see what decisions need to be taken and how relevant they will be. So as promised, we're going to wrap up today's webinar. We're running close on time, so we'll try to keep this section a little quick. But we want to, again, wrap it up with some actionable takeaways. So Seve is going to talk to us a little bit more about initiatives he's put in place and that he thinks are relevant with his agency and just in the industry at large. James is going to walk us through some thought-provoking questions about knowing your community, social equity and social economics, as well as parks planning. So I'll let Seve take it from here.
Well, thank you, Alysson. So just to share a few examples from Thornton here that we've been able to implement and adopt as part of the programming modules to bring about equity. So creating an adaptive and inclusive recreation program. I'm sure most of you understand this. So the concept is that if there's a person looking to register for an aquatics class, learn to swim class, but has a special accommodation request, the goal is not to say that we do not have that available, the idea is to at least engage the family member or the youth in question and talk through what the actual real accommodation need is, and then assess the situation. And if it's available to implement within the cost or the budget that's available for that program, we should be able to do that. So becoming more inclusive is the whole goal, and becoming more accommodating. And then offering Wi-Fi access in parks and recreation. I'm sure most of you heard about this during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, as many of the youth in the community were attending school from using Zoom or other media. And then the idea being that in the first couple of stimulus packages, there was no inclusion of Wi-Fi improvements in affected areas or underserved areas where computer access was very important, but diminished. So in the latest stimulus package, you might be happy to note that there is provision to improve Wi-Fi access in parks. And I think most cities should take advantage of this situation by allowing for greater Wi-Fi access to help everybody in the community, not just the youth who are looking to take classes through Zoom. And then obviously the other piece is the community development block grants, CDBG funds. Many cities in America are familiar with this. That's a funding stream that's offered by HUD, Housing and Urban Development of the federal government. It's an annual fund. And in our case, we've been able to leverage a lot of the CDBG funds to basically level the playing field and bring about equity where a homeowner needed a ramp built just because they encountered a certain hardship, and that allowed us to build that ramp so that they could get in and out of that house much more easily than in prior situations, and still avail our programs and so on. And then obviously offering reduced rate and scholarship programs, which Alysson spoke to earlier. We do that very well in our community, and our goal is to even grow that programming so that we become more and more inclusive. And again, this is about targeted involvement and creating special events. That's not the norm. So the idea is that if you're a community that has had new immigrant populations move in, one easy way to break the ice with them is through the sport of soccer. Everybody in most countries in the world follow the sport of soccer. So you could host, say, a refugee soccer tournament or a new immigrant soccer tournament that allows them to participate and break the ice and know that we're being inclusive of them. But at the same time, have your staff there also present, talking about all the other opportunities and programs available and facilities and amenities available in the system that they could avail in the coming months and years. And we've been able to do all of these things here in Thornton quite well in the last year or so. And with that, I'll pass it on to James.
Thanks, Seve. Yeah, so understanding GIS and geospatial technology really helps us accomplish the goals and tasks that are set forth. And there's a lot of questions that we can ask and answer with these tools that we now have available to us. So knowing the community, where are our active registration users and what are they coming in for, and what are the programs that work? How many people are using programs from outside of our organization, and why? That's an important question to ask and answer. How long does it take for any citizen to walk to a park? Jonathan showed the buffering of the parks and showing the gaps where those potential new pocket parks or facilities could be established within the community. Do we have the right balance of the amenities that we want to promote? So open spaces and trails and so forth. That's very important, and GIS and geospatial tools allows us to answer those as well. And then how well are we engaging with the citizens and the park programs? Do they know about the services that we offer? And how easily can we get them access to make reservations by clicking on a map and identifying a location and reserving that park? So all very important questions. GIS allows us to ask and answer those in a very seamless and interactive way very quickly. Furthermore, what we also have the ability to do is look at the social equity and social economics of the area we serve. Where are those lower income communities, and why do they have less access to certain parks and facilities? And then we can accomplish that through the cost recovery side to engage and increase that participation. Identifying racial disparities and how we can overcome those. GIS allows us to do that. And then also looking at the services that we provide can directly affect the social equity and economics of the community. So let's get that level playing field that the image that Seve shared with us earlier to where everybody can see the game. Everybody gets an invitation not to the dance, but also to dance at the event. So all important concepts to make sure that we all are working from the same point. And then finally, in the park planning side, we often see a lot of parks and recreation departments are still growing. You're still building new parks and new facilities within parks, or changing the amenities within a certain green space. So what are those ideal locations for a new park? What is the best site that would serve the community the most? You know, how effectively can we connect linear greenways? Where I live, we have a fantastic trail program that connects all of our parks, and I can walk from park to park or ride my bike from park to park. So all very easily done with GIS. And then finally, how will social economic trends influence our decisions? You know, so when we run the analysis and we look at this data, what are the next steps? How can we engage and make the most out of the initiatives that we put forward? So all very important things to identify, takeaways for today's webinar. And I hope that each of these concepts really give you some next steps for your organization and your department.
So we'll move into the Q&A portion of the webinar. So I'm passing the mic over to you guys, the audience. I know we're a little tight on time, but I think we'll have time to maybe go over by a couple minutes. If not, if there are any questions and people have to jump off, as you mentioned, we'll get this recorded and send you the answers. So I have a few already here, which I'll get to. So James, Jonathan, you talked about walking distance and some demographic applications for your software. Any other technologies in mind to help reach social equity?
Sure. So the challenge we had for today's webinar was time. Right. So we could dive into a lot of different concepts with this geospatial tools and data available to accomplish the goals and tasks that are set forth. There's a wealth of information that's online now for data layers that Jonathan had touched on the tapestry and the income and the racial breakdown in certain areas. There are literally, Jonathan, hundreds of those tapestry type layers, all the way to the point to where specific programs, like how much are households spending on their pets in a certain area. So if we want to open up a dog park in a certain area, we can use that data to try to identify where where people are using funding to for pet spending. So literally, there's ESRI, the company, the business partner that I mentioned earlier, has a wealth of information, all different types of data. We talked a little bit about social media. That's another big player within this. So getting essentially a live poll of social media feeds and what people are talking about through online resources. That too can be incorporated into the analysis. So there's a lot that we could dive into, and I'll be happy to chat, with anybody that has more questions about that.
Thanks, James. As a reminder, guys, if you have any questions, you can type it into the question bar. I have Seve one here. How did you get buy-in from your board staff members to start a cost recovery exercise in the middle of the pandemic?
A good question. Actually, again, being very deliberate about it, because I felt that the success of the program basically rested on having everybody included. So we included board members, city staff, finance and budget, as I shared earlier, from the very beginning. So we shared the idea, or I shared the idea initially, that we're looking to do this, brought on our department leadership team, obviously, got my boss, the city manager, to buy into it, and then implemented the process by rolling it out at a staff meeting, and then did the same with the 3 boards that we work with. But doing it at the very beginning and involving them in the question and answer, because they had a lot of questions in the beginning, but those were answered by the end of the process after 6 months, where they saw the actual model in play, and they were very impressed with it. So getting them involved in the very beginning was most important.
That makes a lot of sense. Any other questions? I don't see any more coming in. I know, again, we're a little bit tight on time, but if anybody has any, please feel free to put them in. I will add a slide up here with all of our contact details. So if you do want to reach out and get in touch with any of us individually for additional questions, please feel free to do so. Again, the webinar is recorded, so you'll all receive a copy within the next 48 hours or so. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for the panelists for taking the time today too and speaking individually about your expertise.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay,
Take
thank
care.
you.